the traitor who used to be Traoré's best friend, and the price of shaking hands with the enemy. In the shadow of trust. The night in Ouagadougou was thick with heat and the relentless hum of cicadas. In the sky, a crescent moon hung like a thin scar insufficient to illuminate the silent shifts happening beneath the surface. Inside the presidential palace, long thought to be secure. After months of internal purges, there remained a shadow no one had yet touched. And tonight, that shadow was about to stir. Ibrahim Traoré stood by the large glass window in his office, hands clasped behind his back. The faint city lights reflected on the pane. He wasn't looking, he was listening. Not to sound, but to intuition. Behind him, a security officer entered, quietly yet deliberately. His name was Malam. Malam, once Traoré's closest friend from their days in the military. They had endured brutal raids together, shared dry rations in the jungle, and dressed each other's wounds with torn shirts. Traoré once said, "If there's anyone I'd entrust my life to, it's Malam." And indeed, he had entrusted not only his life, but the back door of the presidential palace to him. Malam was assigned to directly oversee its defense routes. But Traoré had come to accept a painful truth. Malam had betrayed him. It started 3 months ago when Traoré received a brief report, a blurry image from a camera at a southern warehouse. A shadowy figure handed Malam a small USB stick, then disappeared in an unlocked vehicle. Vague evidence. No sound, no documents, but he felt it. His instincts, those that had saved him countless times on the battlefield, were screaming. He didn't confront him, he didn't launch an investigation. Instead, he remained silent and began laying a trap. Over the following weeks, Traoré deliberately leaked information about reassigning some loyal commanders. He spoke of it in front of Malam. He even let fake deployment orders leak to certain bases. And just as predicted, 3 days later, an unidentified armed group appeared near Base 14, the site Traoré was scheduled to inspect. Malam had no idea he was walking into a chess game crafted move by the very friend he had betrayed. Malam. Traoré's voice was calm, slow as the officer approached his desk. "You called for me tomorrow night. I want you in a private meeting. Just a few members from the inner circle. I need your opinion on a new security protocol." Malam nodded, eyes masking false loyalty. Traoré smiled. Bring your encryption card too. I want to test some communication channels." "Understood, Mr. President." That very night, Malam unknowingly handed over the final piece of the puzzle. Inside the palace's security coordination room, 3 cryptographic experts, unbeknownst to anyone, cloned and decrypted Malam's encryption card. The decoded message was short but clear. "Initiate operation date ticks 04. Presidential Palace will have an open corridor from the north. Ensure no regular forces present. Objective capture alive." The sender. A contact from the old military guard, someone Traoré had personally defeated during the coup the year before. The next morning, Traoré still met Malam with a handshake and a smile, as though nothing had happened. Malam had no clue that over 30 loyal soldiers had been redeployed within the palace, not to protect the president, but to guard the truth that was about to be unveiled. That day, a private meeting was convened in the basement of the presidential palace. Malam walked in with his usual confidence. But when the door shut behind him, he noticed there weren't just a few people in the room. Nearly 20 individuals were present, including the military advisor, security chief, and a former intelligence officer who had once served under his command. At the center, a wooden table. On it, a laptop played surveillance footage, Malam receiving the USB, sending encrypted messages, all fully decoded. No one said a word. Only Malam stood there like a creature caught in a spotlight in the dead of night. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Traoré entered from the rear door. "I didn't want to believe it, until you confirmed it with your own actions." Malam trembled. I was forced. I had no choice." Traoré cut in, voice cold as steel. "When I entrusted you with one of the most critical positions, I had no choice either, except to trust you." Malam collapsed. His shoulders quaked. No one touched him. No one spoke. Because the deepest pain isn't being captured, it's being exposed by someone who once called you brother. When the truth is revealed, The underground security chamber beneath the presidential palace of Burkina Faso fell into an eerie stillness. No one spoke. No one moved. Only the shallow, panicked breathing of Malam echoed through the sealed room. The man who was once Traoré's dearest friend, the one who had stood shoulder to shoulder with him on the battlefield, who once vowed to live and die for the revolution, was now on his knees, eyes clouded by a truth too heavy to deny. On the screen in front of them, lines of decrypted messages glowed coldly. The coup schedule security blind spots within the palace, even details about bodyguards who could be replaced on the day of the planned uprising. Traoré stood still, no anger, no outburst. His eyes were calm like an autumn lake. But that very stillness was what made everyone afraid. "How long have you been shaking hands with them?" His voice was flat, emotionless. Malam didn't answer. He tried to speak, but his throat seemed strangled by guilt. "I gave you the back door key. I let you control the access codes to my office. I believed that if anyone was going to shoot me in the back, it would never be you." A loud thud echoed as Malam dropped to his knees, palms slamming against the cold stone floor. "I had no choice, Ibrahim. They have my wife and children. They threatened to kill my family if I didn't cooperate." Traoré stared at him. For a brief second his gaze flickered, but was quickly veiled beneath the icy veil of discipline and duty. "You had a choice. When I was being hunted by the former regime, I could have run. I could have betrayed everything I believed in, but I chose sacrifice." "They won't stop," Malam cried out. "Even if you imprison me, those behind me are still preparing. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Traoré stepped closer. "And because I understand, I must do what a leader must do." The iron door at the back creaked open. Two Special Forces soldiers entered, standing silently at attention, waiting for orders. No one spoke. Malam clenched his fists, bowing his head not out of fear of death, but because he knew. The greatest loss wasn't rank, wasn't life. It was the bond he had once believed was unbreakable. Traoré lowered himself into the chair across from him. His eyes no longer held anger, but the crushing weight of bitter disappointment. "I won't let you die." The room froze. Malam looked up, eyes red, unable to believe what he had just heard. "I want you to live." Traoré continued each word, striking like a hammer. "Live to face your guilt. Live to witness this country change. And live to understand. Forgiveness isn't because you deserve it. It's because I refuse to let betrayal rot my soul." A heavy silence fell. Then Traoré turned to the two soldiers. "Strip all privileges. Detain him in isolation at Compound 8. No contact, no communication, no execution, until I say otherwise." Malam trembled. His shoulders jerked as though torn apart by a sentence heavier than death itself. After Malam was escorted away, no one in the room dared speak. A senior officer near the door stepped forward. "Mr. President, forgiving him, isn't that too risky?" Traoré looked down at the floor. "A traitor, if executed, becomes a symbol for those in the shadows. But if he lives, then he becomes a living lesson for anyone still trying to play both sides." In that moment, Traoré's eyes were no longer just a leader's. They were the eyes of a brother who had learned the painful cost of sacrificing trust to preserve the soul of an ideal. The story of the exposed betrayal was never officially released. But among high-ranking security officials, everyone knew a once trusted confidant of Traoré had been stripped of all authority and quietly imprisoned. No names were spoken, no headlines were written, but the looks in the eyes of those who had considered shaking hands with the usurpers had changed. That silence was more terrifying than any public punishment. A week later, at a closed internal meeting, Traoré stood to address more than 200 young officials. He never mentioned Malam, but he said something that made the entire hall fall still. The true enemy of a nation does not always come from the outside. It is when trust among comrades on the same front begins to fracture. And then he concluded, "I can forgive a traitor, but I will never forgive a country that allows betrayal to flourish." Elsewhere, in a solitary confinement cell, Malam sat by a small window looking out at the empty prison yard. No one spoke to him. No one called his name. Only a cold brick wall. and an old newspaper. On its front page, an image of Ibrahim Traoré shaking hands with a poor little girl in the countryside, smiling as if his heart had never been wounded. Malam reached out to touch the paper, and for the first time he cried, not for the punishment he received, but because he had betrayed someone truly worth trusting. Conscience in the dark. 30 days in isolation at Compound 8 might not seem long to a man who once endured battlefields. But for Malam, they felt like a lifetime. The room had no real window, just a narrow slit high above his head, enough to hint that sunlight still existed outside, but too small to see anything clearly. The cell door was reinforced with 2 layers of steel guarded day and night by 2 soldiers. No one spoke to Malam. No one called his name. He was left alone with himself, and that was the most terrifying punishment of all. At first, Malam maintained a stony face. He sat curled up in a corner, staring blankly at a crack on the wall as if trying to justify himself within its fractures. He had once commanded troops, had once been saluted by subordinates and entrusted wholeheartedly by the president. But all of it had dissolved like foam on water. At first, he rationalized, I was forced. I did it to protect my family. I didn't want this. But as the days dragged on, that lie lost its power even over himself. On the 13th night, Malam had a nightmare. In the dream, he was back in the war zone digging trenches with Ibrahim Traoré deep in the jungle. A massive raid erupted. Gunfire echoed from all directions. He remembered vividly he was shot, blood pouring out. And it was Traoré who turned back, hoisted him onto his back, and carried him over 3 kilometers through a hail of bullets to safety. That memory jolted him awake, drenched in cold sweat. The cell was freezing, but his face was streaked with tears, warm and unstoppable. Not from pain, not from fear, but because for the first time he realized he had betrayed someone willing to die for him. On day 15, a silent guard slipped a small paper package into the room. Inside was a notebook and a pen. No note, no instruction, just silence. But Malam understood. Someone, perhaps Traoré himself, wanted him to write everything down, not for a report, not for a confession, but to face it. From that day forward, he wrote daily, pouring out the heaviness within. He wrote about the days they had survived hunger and jungle together. He wrote about the moment he signed the betrayal plan with a trembling hand and a cold, unflinching stare. He didn't write to seek forgiveness. He wrote for one thing only, peace of mind. On day 25, he stopped writing. The notebook was full. The final page read in a shaky hand, I have no excuse. I deserve to be buried beneath the red soil where we once fought. But if you're reading this, Ibrahim, know that I betrayed you. But I do not want to die a man without a conscience. He folded the notebook and placed it on the table, then sat upright. For the first time, he sat like a real soldier. The next morning, a guard entered with a temporary transfer order. The president is calling for you. Malam looked up. No reaction, just a slight nod. His steps were heavy but not dragging. He walked as if heading into his final battle, not to win, but to face the brother he once denied. When the door opened, light poured in, stopping him in his tracks. Traoré was sitting alone in a modest wooden room behind the camp, the very place that once served as a secret rest spot for commanders during the war. No bodyguards, no officials, just 2 men, and a familiar notebook on the table, the one Malam had filled. Malam entered silently. He stood there thinner now, hair cropped short, his eyes calm as still water. Yet there was something about him that made Malam certain. This was no longer the president he had betrayed. It was the soldier who once carried him through a storm of bullets. You've read it? Malam asked hoarsely. Traoré nodded. Every word. A long silence. Malam slowly knelt. Not to beg, but to return the respect he once trampled. I don't deserve to be called brother. Maybe not, Traoré said. But this country still needs those who lost their way to find it again. Traoré didn't forgive him with words. He gave him the chance to atone, starting with overseeing a political ethics training camp for troubled youth. Young men who had stumbled but not yet fallen beyond redemption. And there Malam told his story truthfully, without sugarcoating. He always repeated one thing: when you betray a man, you might run from it. But when you betray a brother, you can never outrun yourself. The Man Who Came Back. Training Camp Number 7 lay on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, nestled among sun-scorched fields in the iconic red hills of the Sahel. It used to be an abandoned military outpost left in ruins after the war until it was reborn as a place of rebirth for those who had once lost their ideals. The camp was the brainchild of Ibrahim Traoré, and it was led by none other than Malam, the man who once betrayed him. No one quite understood why Traoré gave him that role. Many opposed it, but the president only said, "To heal a wound, sometimes you must let the hand that held the knife be the one to stitch it shut." Since then, Malam spoke little. He worked hard, kept discipline strict, but no longer wore the cold face of a commanding officer. His face now bore the traces of shame and the slow redemption of a man cleansing himself with action. He taught the young men who were once used by insurgents as pawns. He taught them to read, to write, to think. But most importantly, he taught them to reflect. And when night fell, he told them the story of a man who had saved his life twice, once in the jungle fire, and once in the storm of betrayal. On August 4th, Burkina Faso's Independence Day, a special event was held in the capital, the Forum of Trust and Restoration, hosted by the government with over 500 young participants rebuilding their place in society. The ceremony was broadcast nationwide. Among the crowd, whispers rose as Malam stepped onto the stage. No uniform, no insignia, just a man in a white shirt holding an old notebook carefully rewrapped. He stood before the microphone. The hall fell silent. "I once held the keys to the presidential palace. I was nearly the man who plunged this country into chaos. I betrayed my dearest friend, the one who once carried me through fire and blood, and I was forgiven, not with words, but with a chance to start again. I do not deserve it, but I am grateful, and to every young person here today, I say this: failure does not kill you. Betrayal does not kill you. Only the refusal to turn back makes you a walking corpse." Malam paused. He opened the notebook to the last page. His voice cracked. "I once wrote, 'I don't want to die a man without conscience.' And today I stand here to prove that I haven't." The entire auditorium rose. Applause thundered for over 3 minutes. In the front row, Ibrahim Traoré remained still. He didn't clap. He only nodded once. A silent confirmation. The man had returned. That night, as Malam returned to camp, he went to his small office, the place where he journaled each night. On the table sat a small box left by someone. No name, no sender. He opened it. Inside was an old faded photograph. 2 young men grinning in a jungle clearing, one tall and lean with sharp eyes, the other darker skinned with a scar on his cheek. On the back, a handwritten line: "A true soldier never dies in the trenches. He only dies when he loses his heart." IT. Malam placed the photo over his chest, sat back in his chair, and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt at peace, not because he had been forgiven, but because finally he had forgiven himself.